All right, all right, all right. One of these days, I will make it look like the light of Jesus is not shining directly on my face. But until then, good morning, guys. Thank you all for joining us. It is once again Friday, which means it is time for Kingdom on the Road. A quick shout out and prayer to Ant and our friends over at Share Foundation this weekend. They are hosting a few different events and different speaking engagements throughout the course of this weekend. So Ant will not be joining us for this weekend's programming, including tomorrow as well, as he is setting up for all of that. So keep the fine folks over there in your prayers, and that God is active and working among that group of leaders. Um, Guys, we have, for those of you that are eagle-eyed and follow the continuity of the network, so across uh
Continuity.
yeah, the continuity of Kingdom on the Road and Buddy Walk and the Misfits and all of that, the two of us have made a lot of comments over the last couple of years of us working together about
About a
how
lot
one
of
day
things.
about we've said a lot about a lot. Um, I can already tell that this thing's gonna get off like a herd of turtles, guys. But we've made a lot of comments over the years about our complicated history with apologetics. Um, which when looking at a couple of faces like this, I know academic prowess is exactly the first thing that comes to mind, 100%.
Hmm.
But we both are well versed in the field of apologetics, but we also share a similar common ground of um, we realize that in any given situation, academic prowess or apologetics conversation, rooting for the big, proof that everything is real and that we have found the big linchpin is not generally the most important conversation to be to have at any given time. And so we don't, and that's why we don't lead with these things, except for when the time comes, like
Today.
this, like today, like the last couple of weeks slash the last, what's it been, about a month and a half. Time flies when you're having fun. But we've made it about halfway through Exodus, and
Much faster than we made it through Genesis.
yes, yes. That's because there's not 18 interpretations for each piece of the story, but I digress. Um, that is, along the way, there's been a lot of conversation about this proof, that this piece of evidence, this time period, all of those kinds of things. And so this conversation has gotten drummed up again. And so now that we've got the keys to the car and we get to drive wherever we please this week, we are gonna dig into it. And so Andrew, go ahead, set the table as far as what, but before we get into our particulars on how we feel about the field and all of those kinds of things, how did you get into it? What's your background in it? All of those kinds of things.
So most people know, if you've listened to Misfits or even listened to me on Buddy Walk, that I come from SBC evangelicalism, went to a interdenominational but pretty evangelical style school. I've taught in all of them. I've pastored in technically two and a half different denominations within evangelicalism. One of them was half non-denominational and half part of the SBC, depending on who you asked at the church. Um, You had this look of like, how does that work?
I
Um,
mean, I did.
yeah, and I've taught within Christian schools. I've grown up in Christian schools. I went to a Christian college. I'm part of the online theology scene. And so the idea of apologetics is huge within all of
Mhm.
those different areas.
Yeah.
And if you ask any specific person what it means, you get half of the same answer as everybody else, and the other half of it is always completely different and contrary to what the other person that you just talked to said.
Usually on purpose, usually gone out of its way to be contrary to the other
Exactly,
person.
because that literally is what the apologetics field is designed for.
Yeah.
So that's part of why. So we have a complicated relationship with it, because I have heard in multiple areas growing up the importance of apologetics as being like one of the main things that needs to be taught.
Yeah.
I have, in my professional ministry career, seen many churches that have said that that literally is the only thing that should be taught within a youth ministry type setting. I've seen
Ah.
some that have said that it should never be taught.
All right.
I have seen. So before we even get into defining it, the relationship with it is complicated simply because of the fact that the field itself complicates it.
Yes.
And our opinion on the field, depending on what area of the country we are from and what area of the world we're from and what tradition theology wise we come from, all have different views on it. And so it's already complicated enough before you get into the fact that if Joe and I are on here, it's going to get even more complicated.
Yeah. 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 Um. So for those of you that don't know, I do not come traditionally to Christianity, to the pulpit, to any of to ministry. Um, I am a guy who has seen a lot, and I when I came to my I guess salvationary moment, if you will. It was Hallmark in every sense of the word. A couple weeks before Easter, I'm half dead. It's a whole thing. Supernatural experience, the whole nine yards. And before ever stepping foot into a church, I was a scientist before any of that, a data analyst that with a strong proclivity towards looking at the science behind the problem. Big believer in things like transhumanism. For those of you that don't know, that just essentially in this version, because that transhumanism can be a whole conversation unto itself. It is essentially in this version of it is man's apex form will be found with the integration of the carbon-based life form and technology.
Mm-hmm.
Super, super reduced down, but there you go. And so I had this big moment, and immediately my brain kicked into, well, I am literally the perfect. I'm in the perfect spot for my brain to concoct a thing to make me feel better, because for those of you that don't know, the brain, the human brain, is designed to protect the body. Now, I'm going to break one of my cardinal rules because I try to stay out of muscular Christianity, but I am going to put this in terms of lifting. For those of you that lift, you notice, get the first set out, no problem. Second set, generally no problem. Third set, a little bit of body English. Fourth set, you look like you're trying to jerk the weight up. That's because the brain is starting to kick in and say, "Yo, this hurts. Yo, this does not feel good," and so the brain kicks in to tell the body to try and compensate, and all of that kind of stuff. Just an example of what the brain is capable of when trying to reconcile a big event or something that hurts or something like that. And so I'm like, man, this book, I grew up hearing about this book in different contexts, right? in a really messed up um, Sunday school situation where the same woman that was teaching the class was the same woman that was coming home and drinking and beating us, to a church that had its flaws. I can sit here and tell you its flaws, but also when I just desperately wanted to believe in my early 20s, and so I just went along to get along, it was a spot where I started hearing language like kingdom. And before, it was going way over my head and hitting the wall behind me. Like, it was not, I had no idea what I was hearing yet. But hearing from guys like Willard and hearing like stuff that was like priming the pump by by the time that I actually, you know, got saved and started doing all of this. And so I started going down the road. I'm like, okay, if we can substantiate a couple of key components of this book, then a whole lot becomes a whole lot more palatable. I can reconcile this idea of the stuff that we don't necessarily have the linchpin for, if a lot of the stuff around it can at least be verified and can have some kind of proof text to it. So I started going down the road, utilizing the skills that I had already had. And this kind of brings me to one of the things that drives me nuts about the apologetics field. And I think that this is going to be a bit along the way. You're going to hear our stories unfolding alongside this idea of the things that drive us nuts about the field of apologetics, all in service of answering this question that is posed in the title of today's live stream: is the study of apologetics valuable? And just a quick welcome to all of you guys. I see the numbers going up. I see you guys tuning in. I see that most of you guys are coming from the Misfits platform. Thank you guys for joining us. And for those of you that are inclined to this kind of thing, we will be getting into the nerdy stuff, but people need to know why we're here and what we're talking about in the first place. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is the sloppiest attempt to try and hit this topic. There's three words that if you are new to apologetics or you are new to scientific study that are going to become your best friend. And then I will hand it over to you, Andrew, to get your thoughts here. Beyond reasonable doubt. Say it with me. Beyond reasonable doubt. That's the premise here for scientific discovery, not trying to find extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims.
It's not even, well, and I would say it's not even that's not even necessarily a scientific claim. Beyond reasonable doubt isn't even a scientific claim, because if that's the case, then there would be no theoretical anything. Because, I mean, the whole basis of a lot of these things is that this is what we are seeing, and so this is what we believe is happening.
Right, beyond reasonable doubt.
But we can't prove it. And we know we can't prove it, which is why we label them as theories and not laws.
Yes.
Beyond reasonable doubt, and this is where, you know, we have this comes up every time we have this discussion when we talk about Western Christianity especially, is that beyond reasonable doubt is very much a Western thing. It's not necessarily a scientific thing. It's we want to be able to say things are objective, because it makes us feel better.
And when you're preaching to a predominantly Western audience, sometimes you need to use the language of the land.
Right. So I wouldn't even say it's necessarily a scientific thing as much of it makes us feel better about the fact we have no idea what's going on.
Aha!
Which is unfortunately common for a lot of different areas of study. This is not real. This is not exclusive to theology by any means. This is the way it is among a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
But we actually define what apologetics is?
No, so I would say go ahead and give us a definition so
Yeah,
that way we're
because
working off
this
of the same
this is
page.
part of the problem with this discussion is that there's
Mhm.
so many different definitions,
Right.
and I put definitions in air quotes there because people will tell you this is what apologetics is, and they'll write a bunch of books saying that this is what it is, and it has
Right.
nothing to do with what the word actually is because apologetics is not a theological thing.
Right.
Apologetics is literally just a style of rhetoric.
Right.
So, apologetics is a Greek word that is dealing with the spoken oral defense of something. So it's the idea, the logos that we get out of John 1, which is the spoken word of God, is part of what we see. Is it that's that word is in this word. So it's Apollo. It's apo logos is Apollo is what we're dealing with. It's the same word we actually get for apology. So
Mhm.
if you are saying you are sorry, you are not necessarily offering a defense, but you are offering something to cover whatever the charge is.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
another way of saying it. It's a rhetoric thing, it's a philosophical thing, it's a in a lot of cases it's a legal thing. And
Right.
apologetics itself is not necessarily we even within theology is not necessarily just what people think of it as. You know,
Yeah.
my main mentor, Dr. Greg Linville, is considered to be the world's foremost sports ministry apologist.
Right.
That's a different type of apologetics, even though it's still theology. It's a different type of apologetics than what most people think about, but it's literally because that's the only word you can use for that. He is going out
Right.
and offering a theological defense to the use of sports as a ministry tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of the problem is that the word is used as its own word when it's not supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. And therein lies, I part of why I don't why I always keep a safety on just how deep into the academic world that I'm willing to go is when you're talking in terms of catch all academics,
Hmm.
a lecture, a class, something along those lines. You are formulating material that's for a larger group of people and has to assume and use shared language among that group of people.
Yes.
Generally, that's when there's an open invitation for a sloppy handling of linguistics, and that's why I'm like, I don't know about utilizing that sort of language at scale, because at what point is it no longer helpful? And that's kind of a question that I've always asked myself in regards to this. So, if you don't mind me taking back over here for a second, I'm going to unpack a little bit more because I think it's gonna take us to kind of a new chapter of this whole thing. So, as I was coming up in the faith, alongside me coming up in the faith and me doing this walk of trying to uncover and bring that the establishment of defendable theory to this, because that's why I say beyond reasonable doubt, and most scientists will
Hmm.
use that phrasing, because you can't, because they are a series of theories. If somebody had the linchpin, then this wouldn't be a matter of faith. If somebody had the linchpin for a lot of the scientific generally accepted principles, then they would no longer be considered defendable theories. They would be considered scientific fact. Now we can depend on them because of life and study and all of those kinds of things, but they're still classified as theory.
Hmm.
And so I started going through the lens of history, knowing kind of like leaning into my strengths and all of those kinds of things. And I started compiling the data and all of that kind of stuff. And alongside that, a YouTube channel was coming up. I don't usually do this because a lot of times I get crap whenever I use full names and all of that because it looks like you're punching up. But I want to go ahead and state
Let
the
let me
but
let me throw the disclaimer in for you, so that way you don't have to feel like you're already giving an apologetic for what we're about to do.
yeah.
So the Misfit listeners know what I'm about to say. Buddy
Mhm.
Walk listeners actually probably should know also, because I'm pretty sure I've said it on Buddy Walk as well. That when
Probably.
we are having these kind of conversations where we are dealing with a very specific area of study or a
Yeah.
very specific theological thing, we are not attacking the individual. We are dealing with a three-tier paradigm. We are dealing with a theological or a philosophical tier level. We are dealing with the ideas, not the person. When we
Right.
have a discussion on things like apologetics, it's going to be very hard to be able to give examples of what we're dealing with without actually putting a channel or a person's name on it, because that's literally part of what the field is that it is a personal defense of a faith. And
Yeah.
so their name is going to come up, but it's not because of them. It's just because of the fact that this is the idea that we are dealing with, which is part of what
Right.
apologetics is supposed to be dealing with. So none
Right.
of these are personal attacks. None of these are even personal recommendations. These
Yeah.
are all just, this is the field that we're in. And anybody that is actually serious in the field of apologetics, most of the time they understand that and it's respected in that way.
Yeah. 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 So along the same timeline that I was coming up in the faith, I was doing it live in front of the mic, so you guys can hear the development of my theology on Buddy Walk along the way. But I was also engaging with capturing Christianity a lot because this dude was bringing on scholars. This dude was bringing on archaeologists. He was bringing on a lot of different voices that had academic credibility to be speaking about the things that they were speaking about. And so to somebody like me at first, that was like gold. And from him I found he's the path that I took to find guys like Michael Heiser. And I started reading different books from other people who had gone through an apologetic journey and all of those kinds of things. And so it was kind of my gateway into the world a lot. And then I noticed that along the way he would start having he framed them as debates. And it is certainly a style of debate. The problem becomes, at what point is it still about having dialogue about this aspect that we may not agree on within the world of apologetics, all in service of glorifying God, because this is Christian apologetics that we're talking about here? And at what point does it become about proving that you're smarter, that you're more well learned, that you're right? And so I stepped away from that world because it started, as the old saying goes, controversy creates cash.
Mm-hmm.
And so I quickly got out of that pool. But again, along the way, and I outline this purposefully for anybody who's watching this, that's interested in apologetics or wondering, like, how do I get involved in this field. It's generally a piecemeal sort of approach. You're gonna end up taking some from here, some from there, some from here. I didn't have the same benefit of being able to point to somebody and say, my mentor so and so got me on the right path to do X, Y, and Z, and look in this particular area. I kind of stumbled my way through this a lot more until I ended up in a situation where I could start to surround myself with strong Christians who knew what they were talking about and had a plurality of fellowship to be able to turn onto. You know what I mean?
And the key thing you said there at the end was the plurality of fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is part of where, when we start talking the apologetics, that apologetics is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do actually have a fellowship of like-minded believers in terms of 1 Corinthians 15, Apostles' Creed, like-minded, then all of the other things that are different
Mm-hmm.
becomes beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't have that, if all you have is just the, the sounding boards, the, the echo
Mm-hmm.
chambers, all those different things, these discussions are not beneficial anymore.
Right.
I'll go and do the opposite of what you did, because, the sports ministry side of me here,
Mm-hmm.
this is part of what we see in 1 Corinthians 9, when we get down towards the end of the chapter and Paul starts going into all the sports analogy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of, I don't just sit here beating the air. One version that way it gets translated is that they're like, well, I don't shadow box. Well, shadow boxing, as a fighter, shadow boxing has purpose.
Right.
Beating the air does nothing but tire you out.
Right.
And if you are just going out looking to beat the air with a bunch of people blowing hot air behind you, it's not going to actually benefit you. But if you are going out and actually training yourself up in righteousness, you're going to be seeing benefit from having these kind of discussions, even with people that you disagree with. And even if people want to call it a debate, or they want to call it a discussion, or they want to call it a live stream, or they want to call it whatever, when you have people that are grounded in a Christocentric theology, then even when we have these disagreements and we have arguments to support our disagreements, there's benefit to it. It's when we don't have those things that we get into the complicated relationship that is the whole point of us having this discussion today.
Right. Right. So along this same time frame was when I started to meet other people that were well versed in theology, well versed in apologetics, but didn't present it first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
It was very much background, and I would watching folks be able to blend the worlds, all while still, like I said, in that fact finding mode, and realizing that there's a moment that I'm convinced every academic gets to if they are in the world of apologetics. There's a moment where you sit back at your desk and you realize the mound of evidence that's sitting in front of you. And you have that moment where you realize, I still need to take a step of faith and believe that all of this is real, that all of this research is legit. That the information isn't the thing that establishes the relationship. Now, unfortunately, many of our academic brothers and sisters experience that same moment, but like any good addict, looking for the next thing that's just that's going to fix the problem, then, and going after, like, attacking it from that addict perspective. And that might sound like harsh language, but for somebody with control issues, somebody with trust issues, somebody with a complicated history with the church, complicated history with the institution of church, all of that kind of stuff. Literally, if there was anybody who would be primed to be going after the next fix, all in, I need to find that smoking gun, I need to find that linchpin, I need to find that big piece of evidence that makes it so that way I don't need to step out in an act of faith.
There's another group that also fits that is not as talked about as much, and that's part of why this whole discussion has to happen as well. Is you also have those people that are addicted to finding these answers because of the fact that they were told that they were not smart enough to be able to do this. And so now it's a matter of proving the other people wrong rather than proving your faith. It's a matter of proving those other people wrong, which again is part of the unfortunate reality for many of us that grew up in church settings or in Christian education settings, that the way we talk about education or who can be educated also plays a role in this of, well, okay, I need to be able to make sure that I can prove this so that way I can show that I am smart enough to be here.
Right.
And so it's not it can come from I don't want to step out in faith, or it can come from I've got to show that my faith is strong. And both of those unfortunately push us way over the edge of what this actually is supposed to look like.
Right. Right. So, but in addition to, I agree with everything that you said, but in addition to, I think there's also a boomerang effect that we are seeing from the whole the lack of embracing deconstruction.
Yes.
And that becoming, I'll say a hot button word. It became an en vogue word, but unfortunately, part of why it became en vogue was because of some of the response from mainstream evangelicalism that we have to war against deconstructionism, that it's the downfall of intellectual thought and all of that, when in all actuality, the deconstruction circles that were happening along, honestly, along the same like path, this whole thing, it kind of follows a similar time frame. And some of the people that I met in the deconstruction that would classify themselves as deconstructing were some of the deepest thinkers, some of the most intellectual or introspective or philosophical folks that were willing to have conversations because they were the ones that were actually seeking information, actually seeking to learn, actually seeking to figure out what is the truth separate from what I want the truth to be. Right. I'm more interested in what the truth is than what I want the truth to be. Sure, when I went into apologetics, I went into it with this idea of, yeah, if I get to say this, if this is real, then this means that sitting right in front of me this entire time has been the way to cheat the Reaper. I've grown as a Christian. I understand, and I don't need to hear about how it's about more than that. Trust me, listen to me preach for more than 5 minutes, and you'll know that I get that notion. Yes. But stepping into apologetics, that's the mindset, right? And so, again, in so many different, like so many other things that I can say, I kind of fell backwards into the right crowd that I ended up in that same notion that a lot of the folks that I would come to respect and embrace as colleagues within the academic space that it's the same approach that they were taking, that they rather get the evidence and the facts than try to substantiate their mode of thinking.
It's and this is where, we're back to, where are you actually wanting to hear, where are you actually willing to hear voices from, part of the
Right.
discussion.
Yeah.
Because part of the reason why deconstruction is outlawed and ostracized and everything else is because of the fact that deconstruction in today's world, where we have the internet and where we are connected to brothers and sisters all over the world,
Yeah.
deconstruction now leads to people recognizing that some of the things we were told to be historical biblical truth turns out to be 70-year-old lies and not actually biblical truth. And so, in order for the people that wrote all those books 50 years ago to still be getting their money coming in,
Yo.
we no longer can say that those things are valid. So if you question what you believe, meaning what I believe,
Mm-hmm.
then obviously you are just falling to the whims of the world, and so we can't have that. And so asking questions now is bad.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we still want you to buy all of our apologetics material, so that way you can still go out and defend against all these people that are telling you that, you know what, maybe Romans 15 does actually mention women apostles.
Oh, you just
Or,
went there.
oh,
You
well,
just went.
that was just from, the comment I got an hour ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's part of the issue that we have, Joe and I specifically,
Yeah.
because of where we fall within all these different worlds. Because both of us, like we said, like we joked about at the beginning, both of us actually are academically trained within theology.
Yes.
But if you look at us, everybody says that we're making it up.
Yeah. Yeah. With um articles and proof text and recommendations and all of those kinds of things to all substantiate the claims. Like
Right.
there's a that we have our credentials, we just don't wear them on our coat.
Because we don't
And
need to.
right,
And that's part of the thing. This is where, the phrase we've been using on Misfits for the past 3, 5, 6 months that keeps coming up is this idea of we're called to more than that.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
called to more than our academic credentials, because it's not about the academics.
yeah,
It's about the fact that the Spirit of God is working, and we get to work alongside it
yeah.
in spite of our credentials.
Right, and you just and yes, in spite of our credentials, but also there's a dimension of, if we are open to a lived in theology, then we allow for the Holy Spirit to use the talents and gifts that we are
Right.
equipped with to be able to make disciples that can make disciples, love on each other, do the things that we are called to do, not out of obligation, but because these are the things that bring about life. Utilizing the things that you are wired for us. Yeah, we still like, Andrew's the guy that comes on that people know on Buddy Walk that always wears a sports jersey. I'm the guy who has a platform called the Punk Rock Preacher. We don't scream high academia.
Hashtag Captain Bluebeard.
Hashtag Captain Bluebeard. So it's utilizing how we're made in the areas in which we're called.
And
That's
that's
the
where,
gimmick here.
when I say in spite of,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that it's because we despise the fact that we have this training or that we don't use it. I'm
I
saying that
despise it
it's
sometimes, but
it's
that's a
it's
different story.
beside, well, that's the big piece, right?
Yeah,
We don't need it,
right. Yeah,
because that's not the goal. The goal is not the academics. The goal is the building up of the kingdom and discipleship.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
the goal. That happens out of a recognition that God doesn't need me to move this forward.
right.
God doesn't need me to have a bunch of degrees to move this forward. God needs me to say, here I am, as unwilling as I actually am.
Yeah.
Here I am. And when that happens, this is what we see. I mean, this is what we see all throughout both testaments, of the idea of the wisdom, wise become fools. Is because if we were actually saying that it's because of the degree that we are able to sit here and do this, we would look as dumb as we actually look. That's the nicest way to put it.
That's the nicest way to put it.
I mean, that literally is the nicest way to put it, because you and I deal with this on the regular.
Yeah.
Of people saying that, well, why would you listen to them? They are misfits. I mean, that's literally how we got connected.
Yep.
And that's part of why it was besides the alliteration value and the fact that I know that works well in marketing, that's part of why we created Misfits in the first place.
Right.
Was because of the fact that there are a lot of us that are academically trained.
Yeah.
And have that plurality and a multi-ethnic sounding board of ideas and histories and traditions and everything that we are able to pull from.
Mm-hmm.
But you won't catch either one of us on here in a suit and tie.
No, I go out of my way. If you guys can bank on something has gone horrifically wrong. If ever the day comes where I log in for a stream and I'm in a suit and tie, that's send help. Like something, a pod person has come. No, seriously, I hate suit and ties. I make it a point not to wear them. But story time with the Saints. So one of the first on ramps, there were a couple of guys that I found by way of capturing Christianity that I do need to shout out, that were very formational for me and how I approach apologetics.
Which before we sound like we're bashing them, to point out the fact that Cam specifically of capturing Christianity is not one of the guys that we were even addressing as far as let's just in it for the money. You can go back and watch. He was doing this. One, he very publicly proclaims he was doing this because his brother was asking questions he didn't have answers to, and he wanted to find the answers.
Right.
And then in addition to that, and finding the answers, he discovered that he actually needed to leave Protestantism and go to become a Catholic.
Yeah.
He was willing to say, okay, the evidence that was presented to me from this side did not line up with what I actually believe and where my faith has led me, and so I need to go where my faith is leading me.
Yeah.
That is a valuable aspect of the apologetics field. But that only happens when it's a humility side. It's not about the building up of a platform.
Yeah.
It's about a discovering of the kingdom.
Yeah. There are some times where I openly admit, and I'm in front of the microphone, I'm in front of the camera enough that I've just got to own it, because if people know what they're looking for, they know what they're looking for. There are some times where my co-hosts are far more charitable than I am when addressing a situation or addressing things, because I was in the periphery enough, because somebody who we used to be attached to would point it out, like, oh, did you hear Cam finally went Catholic? And so I kind of I had tuned out from that, and I had my own opinions as far as all of that goes. But again, that's a different conversation. But so watching Capturing Christianity is the spot where I learned about inspiring philosophy.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, we have kind of a tongue-in-cheek ripoff of IP's thing.
It's not a ripoff as much of exactly what we've described before, of a not as academic, but academically backed discussion that he has that is way more academic. And yeah, although he fully admits he does not look like an academic either, which is part of what makes his videos so great.
Yeah. I want to know what the full piece is that he's got tattooed on that you can only see the top of. And I'm like, yeah, I'm curious. Anyway, only because I really like tattoos. There you go. There's your hot take. But I'm actually working with an artist and getting a full piece done. So there we go. That's the kind of guy y'all are dealing with if you didn't know me yet. Who's shocked? But so that along the way I found IP, and I was like, this is somebody that is sarcastic. You can tell his sense of humor, especially since he started making more short form content and all of that. But
his TikToks are great.
Yeah. But he was backing a lot of his stuff with high academia and all of that. And I found the group that I would end up inadvertently calling my people in the field of apologetics, and that was the people that were looking to substantiate the MT2. And that was my first big play from taking the trip away from consuming history and dates to contributing to the conversation, which Andrew will tell you changes the entire paradigm. When you become active in the field and not just consuming the field, you realize how shark infested it really can be, and how and you end up with a measure of grace to people that, because things have this combination of moving at a glacier pace, but also this new development, it's a weird combination of things that just make it so that way apologists are kind of like pastors. Those are some of the titles that you are going to find to be the most scrutinized in the court of public opinion. Sometimes we can argue that somebody needs to be scrutinized because they're putting forward bad information and bad data.
Right.
And that exists in the field of apologetics. But just at a base minimum, before you evaluate how good or bad their content is, somebody's already getting scrutinized.
Yeah, the weirdest feeling was the first time that I got tagged by somebody wanting me to come into a conversation. Was very odd. But and this is where, again, this is part of the debate among that we're going to have on Let It Rip tomorrow and everything, as far as women in leadership and everything else, is that the titles that get placed on these sort of things are, again, part of what the apologetics debates should actually be able to deal with, but normally don't because of how politicized everything is. The title of apologist is not something that we see in Scripture. Just straight up, it's not. The title of theologian, though, also is not.
No.
The title, that's not something we see. But in reality, to be a pastor in today's world, a post-Enlightenment world, if you as a pastor are not able to be a theologian, whether you are professionally trained or just well-read within the Scriptures, you're not going to be able to feed your flock. That's just the way it is in today's world. You won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
If you as an apologist are not a theologian first, not quite sure what you're defending.
Yeah.
Just straight up, don't know what you are actually defending. This is why, when we look at the 3-tier setup that we've got within Misfits and OV and CSRM, it starts with the theology. Before we even get to philosophy, we have to start at the base minimum of, can we actually see a Christocentric theology? Is this something where what we are talking about, again, is it going to be beneficial? Is it going to point me back to seeing Jesus at the center?
Yeah.
Because if it's not, then either one, the theology needs thrown out because it's not a theology, it's a philosophy.
Right.
or it's something that it's just going to be a waste of our time. I mean, that's literally all it is. It's going to be a waste of our time. If we can't see Jesus at the end of this is a waste of our time.
Yes. Yeah.
Plain and simple. There's no other way to look at it.
Right. Right. And so, and it's stunning to me. It's unfortunate. I shouldn't say it's stunning. It used to be stunning. It's not stunning anymore. But it is unfortunate that in a field that's literally designed to try and explain and substantiate the claims of Scripture, that we don't see Jesus at the center of it more often. And so I started hearing folks speaking out. There were more platforms now for people to speak out about their proof texts and their research for to substantiate the empty tomb. And again, data analyst. I see these people that are going 18 steps deep to develop their proof, and I'm like, you're going to get stopped at like step 4, because a hardcore skeptic is going to say, I don't agree with that. Thus, the rest of your proof is dead. And I'm like, I'm looking at it. And so I started taking the steps and I started charting it out myself. Well, I didn't know at the time that essentially what I was doing was writing my own proof. And that's a scientific term. I'm not using proof. Like I'm going to assume that if you are this deep in a conversation about apologetics, that you are interested enough that even if you don't know the terms that we're using, that you're going to look up the terms that we're using.
I'll lay out a very simple definition here of what you're talking about. So it goes beyond science into, it's actually a math term. It's not even a science term. It's a math term that science uses. So it's a logic thing.
Yeah.
It's a if X, then Y.
Right. Exactly.
And if X, then Y, then Z.
Yep.
With the whole purpose of if X exists, then Z is the logical conclusion.
Yes.
Straight up, that's all it is.
Yep.
But like you said, that's not how it's presented. And so we do this stuff all the time as humans. That's part of how God has designed our brains to work.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily recognize it as that, which is why it took you a while going into it to realize that that's actually what you were doing.
Yeah. So I edited the original concept down, but was still using things that would have been debated. And I'm like, I think I can develop a proof here that doesn't use anything, that doesn't rely on anything, that wouldn't otherwise be substantiated by most academics. And so I started cutting that away. Well, next thing you know, I had a full-on article that and knowing folks from the academic world, I started reaching out and I was like, take a look at this. You know, if it's terrible, do not let it ride based off of our friendship. Tear it to pieces. But I'm curious, and so I started passing my work around, and I started gaining some traction because it was getting reviewed by my peers, and successfully so. And
by your peers, and again, this is part of what we've been talking about, and it's an important thing just for me to jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
By your peers who are not part of an echo chamber.
Correct. Yeah. Everybody that I sent it to was denominationally biased, and I call them that to their face. It's a phrase that I use for anybody who is diehard a specific denomination. I call them denominationally biased.
And it's not always a bad thing.
No.
If you recognize it.
Right. Yeah. There are beautiful things about a lot of the traditions. It's literally the thesis statement that I'm spending the next couple of years on Buddy Walk developing is that there is purposeful intent
Mm-hmm.
behind the variety of manifestations of expressions of worship that we see throughout the entirety of the church. The way that Jesus taught, the way that Jesus ministered, the way that Jesus trained was always designed to produce a plurality of expressions of worship.
Mm-hmm.
And thus, denominationalism is not a dirty word. Making things that aren't theology prime, that's a dirty word, but that's a much bigger concept than just denominationalism or any of these kinds of things.
And that's, I mean, again, that's part of what happens as to why we have a complicated relationship with all of this.
Right.
Is that one of the big arguments against Christianity is this idea of, well, you guys can't agree on anything. Look at all the denominations.
Yeah.
When in reality, we all agree on very specific things. We all agree that, as the scriptures said, Christ came, died, buried, rose again, appeared to 500, Paul being the least of these and the last. And that their stories carry on. That's 1 Corinthians 15, super shortened and summarized if you didn't know what that was. Like, we all agree on that. That's that, and that really is all that we need to agree on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that is what we need to agree on. The rest of this stuff is just stuff. It's important stuff, and it's stuff, but it's important for different reasons, because my context here is different than my friend Prudy Ray's context over in India.
Yeah.
And so the stuff that matters here may not matter as highly over there, and that is the beauty of the gospel.
Yeah. And that's the important other in the room that needs to be talked about when reconciling all of this. I watched as America, the United States, cannibalized its own over the last several years. Mind you guys, my education, my path goes right alongside the path of the pandemic. And there's a lot of complications, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of pieces involved in what all of that ended up looking like. But I watched as it became in vogue to show that you were smarter in a Christian context than others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of why I didn't really get into the Twitter culture. I didn't really get into, I wasn't going to, after I got published, the furthest extent that I took it was accepting some lecturing gigs and all of that. But I wasn't going to go out and now present myself as a high level academic and all of that kind of stuff, because that wasn't a culture that I was interested in getting into, because I didn't want to get shoved into the rat race of I need to prove that I am smarter than you.
Right.
And again, I have been accused of being a nihilist or an existentialist. I wouldn't say I'm a nihilist. I think there might be something to the it's what's the point? If you're smart, what's the point? If you have all of this evidence, what's the point? If you have this mountain of evidence that all suggests this thing, what's the point? What do you do with it?
Which, if you didn't know, he just summarized 1 Corinthians 13.
Right. So we get back to this home base of, we've developed these thought processes and we've developed this experience base in apologetics and have this training and all of that, but we come back to, this isn't the thing that we find to be the most valuable in the conversation, and thus we don't lead with it. And to let me take the voice of the audience here for a second. To somebody that would be watching this, who's less engaged with apologetics or less engaged with academia, and still thinks of it in terms of it's for this particular group of people, and these are the people that seem the most assured, and all of those kinds of things. Or from the perspective of the person who really values academia and all of that at a very high premium. You and I have been around enough to, within certain groups of people, earn our spot at the table and earn our voice.
Mm-hmm.
People have seen long enough now that we know what we're talking about. So then explain to the folks, if you have all of this training and you have all of this experience, then why is it that being able to reason your way through the scriptures in a very logical or academic way is secondary to the things that you do preach first and foremost, Christocentric theology, or this position of love God, love others?
So I'm going to start with where I get to be the wet blanket first. Part of the reason, because like you said, we have earned our spot at the table. We've got both the faith credentials and the academic credentials to have earned the spot at the table, but are regularly not invited still to the table because of the very fact that we sit here and do this dressed like the way we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or because we sit here and do this and are very intentional about saying, yeah, this is not done right.
Yeah.
That's the first part of it.
Right.
Because that is something that people don't necessarily always recognize. You know, there are the unfortunate side, and this is something that I've dealt with even when I was in college already. The unfortunate side of being a misfit is when you have said something that is ignored, and then sometimes as quick as 6 months later, sometimes it's 6 to 10 years later, the very
Yeah.
people that were making fun of you for it are now promoting it as their work and making a bunch of money off of it.
I remember the first time that I got plagiarized, and I got like somebody just totally ripped off my gimmick and all of that kind of stuff. I'm like, that was simultaneously like, huh, I feel like that means that I've made it to a certain extent, that somebody's ripping off my
Right.
stuff. But also I'm like, you lazy, like, come
Right.
on,
Well,
man.
and not even, and I'm not, I'm, and this is, again, this is part of the stuff that also is part of what makes you and I get walked on a lot, is that if this stuff actually is now getting out and the gospel is being heard through it,
Yeah.
who cares?
That's what matters the most. Yes.
The problem, though, is that it's put out there now as something, and it's been now positioned in a way based off of the stuff we've already talked about, to where now it is not actually as effective as it could have been if it had actually been put in place 6 years, 10 years, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
That's where it becomes a problem. Now, the other side of it, and this is part of where you actually were asking as far as why don't we just put ourselves out there that way, is that me doing that has no benefit. Because the people that I can sit and talk with that actually want the relationship, want the discipleship, actually want an honest answer,
Yeah.
are not going to sit down across somebody that is promoting all of these sort of titles and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's just straight up. And those of you that are on Twitter listening, I'm sure all agree, because that is literally what you have told me.
Yeah.
That is part of the problem, is that the way that we as a culture here, and this is one that's more specific to America in general, the way that we have positioned academia secular, academia Christian, worldview Christian or secular, apologetics, the way we have positioned all of those things is a way that is no longer considered approachable or accessible.
And the thing that drives me banana about that is the fact that everything that I preach about kingdom, about the that's based and steeped in the hermeneutic of the continuous kingdom of God, and everything that comes off of that is all backed by academics that anybody with an internet connection with the idea
Right.
of knowing where to look could do.
And that's part of why I said before, if you are trying to be in ministry today,
Yeah.
without any kind of theology background, you're not going to be able to go anywhere, because of the fact that all it takes is a simple Google search.
Yeah.
For people to be able to see what's going on.
Right.
The other side of it, and this is where we haven't actually dealt with it yet, but I will now just because it's fitting. The way that we have framed apologetics in a Cold War theology, evangelical culture, is completely backwards from the way that we see apologetics actually play out in Scripture. Because we do see apologetics play out in Scripture. Paul literally, yeah. So Paul, when he goes into Athens, when he goes to Mars Hill, his message is not the same as when he goes around Jerusalem, or when he goes in other areas of Turkey, or even other areas of Greece. He preaches and argues, he apologizes in a way that is recognized by the high-level academic philosophical minds of the people of Athens.
Right.
He uses if-then statements.
Yep.
He uses logic. He uses a proof text in terms of what you were talking about earlier. He does all of this. When he's talking to a Jewish population, he goes back and digs deep into the Torah. And he pulls it out and just shows it in front of their face. We see it happen. But the problem is that what we see with Paul, what we see with the other apostles, what we see even with Jesus, because technically speaking, we could classify the Sermon on the Mount as an apologetics piece. He was giving a defense for the faith.
Yeah.
And specifically, he was giving a defense of the Jewish faith that had been lost and was being argued against.
Yeah.
The way that we approach apologetics culturally, we like to talk about the Bible as the sword of the Spirit, and then we think that means that we're supposed to go out there stabbing people.
Yep.
Apologetics.
Which legit, for those of you that didn't know, that's actually like a thing. That's actually
I saw that argument a few days ago. This is not, that wasn't hyperbolic. That literally is direct quotes of people.
Yep.
Apologetics literally, by definition, is a defense. It is a defense of your faith, not an attacking with it. And so that is the first place that we got to start with why we have a problem with it. If people were actually using it correctly, he and I at least still would probably not be claiming ourselves to be apologists, but we would not be having this discussion.
Right.
Because there would be no issue. Right.
Yeah.
The problem comes when we believe that the goal, and this is part of why you said what you did before, as far as the fact that they called it a debate.
Yeah.
Even though, and in some forms it was a debate like we see with the presidential debates of the past 10 years, as opposed to what we have seen in presidential debates the past 50 years before that.
Right.
A debate is supposed to be a dueling apologies, so that at the end, the truth is stacked up. Yeah. And we can see which one holds more weight. Yeah. That's the whole point of them. Not we are going to tear you down until you can't walk anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in defense again, because what I don't want to have happen, because I would reckon that the folks that are really the most invested in finally hearing us come out about this and have this conversation are the type of folks that would be inclined to watch Capturing Christianity and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have no problem with Cam Bertozzi. I have absolutely zero problem. He and I are friends on Facebook. I have talked to him a couple of different times. I have no problems with Cameron Bertozzi. We have no problem with Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. We have no problems with a lot of the names that you would recognize.
Right. So I too have had conversations with him. Very nice dude, like all of that. And even moreover, for those of you that are keen on watching body language and watching presentation styles and things like that, take a look at a lot of what happens in those sorts of debates. At least the ones that I've seen, a lot of times I see Cam trying to keep it on the rails and two academics who come in with a preset of, I need to show my academic superiority in this situation. And before Cam even has a chance to really set it up in a with that air of grace and mercy that should come along with having a conversation within the paradigms of Christianity.
And that is, and again, what you just said, the paradigms of Christianity should be there if this is actually a theology.
If this is actually, yes, exactly.
And not an academic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is part of why we have the issue we do with it, is that the theology gets lost behind the academics to the detriment of other people. Not to the detriment of the argument, but to the detriment of other people.
Yeah.
Because what happens when we use the sword of the Spirit as a weapon to attack rather than part of our method to defend? I mean, the sword of the Spirit cuts through the soul, not just skin and bone.
Right.
Why are we wielding it as if we are just swinging it randomly, trying to take off the head of the person closest to us?
Yeah.
Especially when that person is a brother who also believes that Jesus came, died, was buried, rose again, reigns victorious. Why are we swinging for their head then?
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, the older I get, the more things fall into the camp of, we could have a theory. You could have developed a theory about this thing, but there is far from any one definitive piece of evidence to substantiate any one, and somebody who is talented enough can orchestrate a very convincing and compelling argument in any of the directions and things like that. And so there are things that just are simply not provable by any stretch of the imagination. And that to me is part of the beauty of the scriptures, but also to go to the actual, value of apologetics. When we look at the Old Testament, when we look at the first 5, we don't need to go any further than that at first. There is so much there that you can point to from a historical standpoint, from an archaeological standpoint, from a biology standpoint, from there's literally so many things just in Egypt just
Mhm.
in Egypt alone. That's where my and I hone in there, because that's where my current work now is working within the realm of Egyptology and the Exodus and the establishment of um, the kingdom of Israel and all of that kind of stuff. But it adds this layer of, okay, again, theories. I believe that you can point Exodus in the time frame of the Ramesside period and all of that. I that's where I would stick it. But I know of other positions where I'm like, there's nothing that says that you're wrong. There's more things that I think say that I would put it here, but I'm not gonna hold it so close fisted to say I'm right, you're wrong, I'm better, you're worse.
And that is the key. First of all, what you just described is what debates are supposed to be.
Yeah,
There's evidence here. There's evidence here. I just think this one has more evidence.
yeah, that's it.
Nothing confrontational about that. It's just we're laying it out and here it is.
Yeah,
But the other part of what you just said is something that not just within this field, within multiple fields, and you and I both have had this conversation together and with Ant and separately on our own shows and everywhere and all at once, is that there is nothing within Christianity that is supposed to be close-fisted. Like, we aren't supposed to be grappling to stuff close-fisted and not letting go outside of Jesus. And even
there's
then,
theology prime.
we're not holding to him close-fisted because he is welcoming us in.
Right.
Like, we don't have to hold anything so tightly and close-fisted that we are coming off as the aggressors, because that's what happens. I mean, the part of why I haven't been on the past few weeks is I just started a new job where I'm working within a residential unit for juveniles. One of the
Right.
conversations I've had with them multiple times is that the moment your fists close, immediately you are perceived as an aggressor.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what you are doing. The moment those fists close, you are perceived to be an aggressor.
Yep.
We can't be doing that as a church and still expect for our witness to be one that is actually Christocentric, and one where one of our the first things that we have in a public address from Jesus is turn your cheek.
Yeah.
Like, why are we so consumed by this idea of we have to have this and we have to be right? This is where, you're about to see what happens when Joe and I both agree at the same time and disagree at the same time, because he gets annoyed when I go into, because of the wording that I use for this. And he's already trying to figure out which one of these things I'm going to. But within the apologetics field,
Yeah.
one of the things you said is one of the places where you and I, again, we agree on this fully. This is not actually a disagreement. He just hates the wording I use because of the baggage it carries in his perspective and his history.
Yeah.
A lot of people I'm working with, when we use the term I'm about to use, it actually is freeing from the baggage and things that they had.
Yeah.
So part of what you said was this idea of this whole idea of evidence, and we're never going to be able to actually prove it outright. We just have evidence that shows that this is more likely than the other.
Right.
Part of what I point out to a lot of people is that a lot of the things within Christianity, a lot of things in the Bible, are things that we are not even supposed to be proving outright.
Right.
Because when we look at Hebrews 11, we aren't supposed to be going out and trying to prove that God created the world.
Right.
Genesis 1 through 11 does not need to be proven to be true in order for our faith to exist. In fact, it actually is counter to our faith to be trying to prove it. Right. This is literally what Hebrews 11, verse 3 says, "It is by faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible." It is by faith that we understand it. It is not by whatever pseudo-scientific studies want to be done by the people in Kentucky that we understand. It is by faith that we understand that God created it by his very word.
Yeah.
And it is by faith that all of these other things that we see, including all the stuff we've already talked about on Kingdom on the Road, from Genesis all the way to where we are in Exodus, the stories that are put forth is that it was by faith that the people we just talked about walked forward.
Yeah.
And it is their testimonies that allow us to see Jesus at the end of the line going into Hebrews 12.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the evidence behind it. Now, you can see on his face, I already know what he's going to say, so I'm going to go ahead and ease his pain and not continue to drag it out even more, even though I would love to see how long he would let me go. That is a big piece of Christianity, but there's another big piece in that what we see in John 20 is that blind faith is not what Jesus actually requires of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Thomas is not ridiculed or condemned or shunned or anything when Jesus says, here you go, you can touch it now.
Right. Right. Right.
Blind faith is not a problem for believers.
Yeah.
But neither is faith that we are able to also hold up with evidence that we can actually touch and see. Both of those things are valid based on where you are at in your walk and what it is that the Spirit has called you out of and called you into.
Yeah. Yeah. So to contextualize all of that within why there's a language discrepancy, because I know Andrew and I have been working together long enough. I understand fundamentally that right now you are watching Andrew poke the bear in real time.
Intentionally.
Intentionally.
Even though we just talked about not doing that, I'm poking him with like a Q-tip instead of the sword, so we're okay.
Yeah, so we're okay. Yeah, we agree at, like, once you boil down the language of it all, and trust me, it took us some time to figure out that we were on the same page as far as all of this goes, because I come from the background where the baggage is that people would hear what you're saying and attribute to it a call to just take Pastor so and so's word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Just take the guy at the front of the room's word for it. And don't, because of faith, don't do academic legwork. And that, unfortunately, you can't reason our way out of the fact that there are some instances where some folks that would say that sort of thing or position themselves in that kind of way do low key mean just take my word for it, just take the church's word for it, just take this teaching's word for it, just take this word for it. Don't do your own legwork, because that sort of thing just divides people. And there are absolutely folks in situations where that goes way haywire. I know from time served that that's not what you mean. But yes, to hear those words strung together in that sequence is like nails on a chalkboard.
Well, and here's a little bit more of the context as well as to why I'm saying that when I'm talking about this with my audience, this is what needs to be heard compared to when Joe is talking to his. Because most of my audience that is listening from a Misfits perspective has been told, don't do the legwork, don't do the research, just trust what I've been saying.
Yeah.
And then they, in their own reading and their own prayer life and their own experiences, are seeing the fact that there is a conviction from the Spirit saying, this is not what I have called you to.
Right.
Step out in faith and be able to say that I am called to more than what Pastor so-and-so is telling me I have to vote as to show that I'm a faithful Christian.
Yeah.
Blind faith is actually the key out for that situation. People that are stuck in abusive relationships a blind step of faith out sometimes is the only way out, because you've tried to present the evidence and it's shut down.
Right.
And so I now have to say that this person is somebody that I believe I can trust, and so I am walking towards them.
Yeah.
That is the difference between the world that most of my ministry is being directed to.
Yeah.
And that's part of why, even though I can flash an academic credential if needed to, it's not going to be beneficial.
Right. And in my context, I could flash an academic credential if I wanted to, but it's not going to be the most beneficial because I serve a community that needs to know that they are loved and cared for,
Mm-hmm.
that needs to know that somebody has their is caring for their soul and has their best interest in mind. My community very much needs a shepherd in that way. And so, sure, there have been situations where folks have stepped out from the audience and out of the community and have said, I am challenging you on this concept, and have presented a, a case for why they think differently, and thus engaging at the academic level is the play in that regard. But that's situational and all
Right.
of that.
And that's the key, because anybody that has seen my Twitter feeds know
Yeah.
that if necessary, I can lay down both a theological and a logical argument in the same 240 characters, and you don't even realize that that's what's just been put down.
Yeah. 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 There's a reality, and I will speak to this because I'm the more for those of you that don't know, Andrew brings me around and keeps me around because I make him look like a moderate. Don't ever get it twisted. If wanted, if desired, if the desired outcome was for this, brother, pack a lunch because we're going to school. Like, I promise you, if the desired outcome was for that, 240 characters would be some of the most biting that you've ever met in your life, and that doesn't need to be hyper aggressive. That can just be from an academic perspective.
And even these live streams we do on Friday mornings,
yeah,
like, Ant is the same way. If he needed to talk you under the table as far as what the academics actually say, he will do it.
Yeah.
The three of us are able to keep ourselves grounded from doing that, because sometimes it's not even a matter of wanting to talk somebody under the table. Some of it is the fact that both of us actually enjoy having these discussions. Yeah. And if somebody was not there to stop us, you thought our 3.5 hour one on Imago Dei was long. Like, look at some of our group chats, and if you can ignore all the GIFs, you'd see that we probably could have gone on another 24 hours without even blinking.
Yeah. There's value in getting rowdy in conversation in an environment where it's safe to do so. It can be animated. Have fun. Let it be lively. That's not that. There's beauty in all of that. Just what is the motivation behind why you're doing it, and where is your heart in all of it? Are you having a lively conversation, or do you feel the need to be correct? Mm-hmm. And that's really where that comes down to. And when we share our experienced perspective with that, we still fall back on the fact that this is valuable because of the other stuff that we preach. We can look back at the value of ancient Israel, of the voyage out of Egypt, or any of the stages of the kingdom of Israel, or any of the pieces in which we can look to history and proof text and all of that kind of stuff, because we have something that we can put our faith into that this story has a point where there is hope and redemption and all of those kinds of things, and the continuity is present, thus giving value to the study of apologetics and things like that.
And the word you said there is part of the other reason why we get left off the invite list a lot of the time, is that both of us, anybody that has listened to anything that either of us have been on, know is that when we talk about the scriptures, we are adamant about listening to the story.
Yeah.
The idea of it being a story carries so much weight in an academic sense that it is interpreted by some to make it as if we don't actually value it.
Right. Which is a weird juxtaposition.
It's a super weird thing because it's the exact opposite of what reality is.
Yeah,
It's
because of the academics that we approach it that way.
Well, and even beyond that, the fact that we can actually see this as a narrative that is playing out is part of what, I mean, you are Mr. C, you look like Mr. Tumnus and you can talk like Mr. Tumnus because you are, a C.S. Lewis expert. You love the idea of mythology and story. I mean, that's why, you didn't give me a chance. I was going to make another network connection when you said we're getting off like a pack of turtles and say hashtag shell shock. I mean, you literally run a show on the Ninja Turtles, everything else. Like the idea of story and mythology and everything plays so heavily into what our faith actually is.
Yeah.
But again, the way that those ideas are presented both in academia and within white evangelical Cold War theology culture of American churches is that the idea of even considering the idea that mythology is in the Bible means that we have completely abandoned all of our faith.
Yep.
When in reality, understanding the fact that this is written as a mythos and that does not detract from its truth, but actually elevates the story to the point where we can actually experience it even 4,000 years after it was written, it changes everything. But only if we actually will allow it to be what it is, instead of either trying to elevate it into an idol or sharpen it into something to chop the next person that you come across head off.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I would send people along with confidence in is I would like to free you from the burden of finding the next big proof. Don't chase that rabbit. It's alluring. It's very alluring, for a lot of reasons. But if you are somebody who is wondering, how do I get involved in this field? Find something that first and foremost you enjoy. And build out from there while keeping yourself grounded, especially if you are doing research that involves the Old Testament. Keep yourself grounded in something that's super applicable, super like frontward facing. For me, it was Matthew. For me, that was very much, that's why I have such a tie to that particular book. That book has helped me stay grounded while also being heavily immersed in the academic side with doing different work. And because I do have a desire to purely go into that world. I don't ever really see myself doing like content creation in that world or anything like that. But
outside of writing.
Outside of writing. Yeah. I mean like video content or anything like that. But yeah, so that aspect of it, I enjoy. And so that's kind of driving, and I can celebrate how God, that I'm an image bearer, and that God has been so good to wire me a particular way, and that I have an opportunity to be grateful for an outlet for that wiring to be able to bring enjoyment or bring understanding or different things like that. The whole time, my posture and position remains the same. That my faith is in God. My faith is not in the science. I believe science. I believe that God gave us science as a means to understand our world. And Christians, this is a call to stop being scared of science. Stop being scared of science. It's okay.
Well, and let me change the word, because once you change this word, then suddenly people are like, oh, wait a minute. Because the word that gets turned around when people throw in the world of science or history, everybody's like, oh, well, this is big academia just trying to take over the church, is the thing that we hear a lot.
Yeah.
What if we change the word to testimony? The testimony of the scientific record, the testimony of the historical record, the testimony of the people that came before us, like all the people that are listed in Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
The testimony of the great cloud of witnesses that allows us to keep our focus on Jesus at the forefront.
Yeah.
The testimony of the 500 plus that saw the risen Jesus, as Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15 again.
Right.
When we suddenly change the idea of testimony instead of science or evidence, suddenly it can't be just thrown out as, oh, well, this is just liberalism and progressivism and everything else. Because literally our entire faith is built off of testimony.
Yep.
It is, whether it's the testimony of those that came before or just the testimony of the Spirit in your life, testimony is what you have built your faith around. And it's that's part of why you go to Matthew, I go to John. Because John literally he is walking daily with Jesus. He's one of the big three that even gets to see the transfiguration.
Right.
He knows what is up. He knows what's going on. He has even gotten the benefit of even being able to see what is coming in the end.
Yeah.
Like, this is a dude that has the credentials. But how does he write his gospel? It's through the testimony of the woman at the well. Yeah. It's through the testimony of the blind man. It's through the testimony of John the Baptist, not John the Apostle. It's through the testimony of the woman caught in adultery. It's through the testimony of the woman that's bleeding. It's through the eyes of the people that experienced Jesus for themselves. That is how he writes his gospel. It is not a first-person narrative, even though it could have been. Right. The only time that he even mentions himself, he is trying to avoid drawing attention to himself outside of the fact he wants everybody to know he's faster than Peter. Like, it's not about him. It's not about his credentials. It's not about who he walked with. It is about the testimony of what Jesus did in the lives of these individuals. Yeah. And that is what he builds that is what the entire gospel narrative, 20-some chapters, is about. It is about the testimony of these people, his testimony being one of the last. Right. Because it's not about him, it's not about his credentials, it's not about all this other evidence, it's about what Jesus did for these people. Right. That is what the gospel is. Right. And so when we change out science and evidence and just look at it as the testimony, which is, again, that's what Scripture says, right? The heavens declare the glory of God. That is a testimony. Science is a testimony to who God is. Right. Job 30 through 38, or whatever the chapters are, is God giving out the list of the witnesses he can call from creation to show Job who he actually is. Right. Like that's what we have. That is what the Scriptures are about. It is the testimony of those that came before us so that we can build on their stories towards the same goal.
Yeah. And the thing to consider for anybody that would fancy themselves an apologist or fancy themselves an academic within the Christian world and all of that, I'm going to say something that is a little punchy, but I mean it. If a solid foundation of apologetics that is steeped and centered in Christocentric theology should lead you out of reading a villain into the scriptures at any point, several points. There's Baskin Robbins. The ice cream shop is open. You can have 52 different flavors of reading a villain into the story. Take your pick. I mean all of them. Or it should take you out of a mindset where you are right and this group of people is wrong. The left is wrong. The right is wrong. This ethnic group, they're wrong. This people from this part of the world, they're wrong. These people that believe that this amendment should be upheld, they're wrong. This, that, or the other. I don't care. Take your pick. It should literally take you out of that mindset. And this idea that we preach about the kingdom of God and about this idea that we are actively engaged with God, that this is active and vibrant relationship, that we are called into a continued renewing, that it's 100% about that and pointed towards that relationship piece with God. All of that, every single bit of it that I have found thus far in my tenure in academia, all serves that. It all points to that. That is the value of apologetics. Understanding what has come before you, all very valuable, not going to save a thing. It's not going to be the convincing thing. So stop trying to think about it that way. And that then, at that point, when you have stopped trying to make it into something that it was never meant to be, that is the point where you will finally hit the most valuable aspects of the study of apologetics.
And you'll find that it actually elevates your ability to actually do these things.
Yeah.
So, have I ever actually laid out the 3-tier paradigm on Kingdom on the Road?
I don't think so.
I know I've done it on Buddy Walk. We do it on Misfits all the time. So, 3-tier paradigm is what we use within Misfits. It's what we use in CSRM, which is another organization I work with, Overwhelming Victory, which is our resource branch, all that. You look at it as if it's a 3-level thing. The first foundational tier is Christocentric theological truths. Everything is built around theological truths that point back to Christ at the center. If that is the case, and Christ then is our foundation, then we actually have something we can build on. But that second level is biblically based philosophical principles. Now we're into the academics. But the academics, if it's Christocentric, we're going to be able to base it on things that we can see within Scripture. It is biblically based thinking on these theological truths that point us back to who Christ is. And what that produces at the top layer is strategically relevant, efficiently effective methodological models, meaning that if we are grounding ourselves in Christ, thinking about those things biblically, then what will come out in our methods is going to point people back to the Christ that we see in the Scriptures. Which is a phrase I use very specifically because it's going to point back to the Christ we see in the Scriptures and not the Christ that people are trying to claim is the one from the Scriptures. Because that is what unfortunately gets used in certain areas of apologetics, is that the Christ that they are defending is white slaveholder Jesus, is capitalist Christian Jesus, is Cold War theology Jesus.
Yeah.
It is, and we'll go and poke the other bears as well. It is straight up communist Jesus. It is whatever label you want to throw on Jesus rather than the Jesus that we actually see in the Gospels, who calls us to more than all of those other labels.
And that's So that becomes one of the, and I think that makes it, that takes it full circle into what we have such a hard time with, because this can also, for as much as this can help strengthen and add a richness and deepness to your relationship with God and all of those kinds of things, um, it can also be a direct on ramp to allow for your own proclivities to be baked into the situation,
Mm-hmm.
for your own opinions, your own perspectives, what you value most, all of those kinds of things. And while there is a level of go out and play to how we understand the scriptures, we need that. There's also the boundary markers that
Mm-hmm.
allow for the freedom for us to go out and play. And so keep what matters. Understand that there are aspects that are given to us that we don't have anything to directly pin it down, time, place, situation, circumstance, whatever, and that is all okay. And that, to me, allows the most amount of freedom and provides the most amount of freedom to be able to dip in and out of the apologetics world, in and out of the kingdom centric world, and understand that it's only, all they are reflections and aspects of the big picture, of the
Right.
whole truth, all of that kind of stuff. And when you look at that entire paradigm, right? What it means to study deeply, to kick the theological can around, what it means to really work these things out and ask questions and interrogate things and all of that kind of stuff. And then you understand the realities of the principles of the stories of the mythos of man.
Mm-hmm.
And you understand that whether it was a literal 6 days or not matters not. Whether it was a basically anything outside of a historical Adam and Eve with that original scene, we hold to a historical Adam and Eve, but the situations and circumstances of the stories that surround the physical tangible aspects are all designed to show us aspects of God, and it all points towards this idea of God with us. Then suddenly, a lot of things you realize, well, wait a minute. If I look from a mainstream perspective, a lot of times you're going to hear that soft handed approach over here and that hard handed academic approach are in conflict with one another. But they're not.
And here's the thing is that if you read Genesis 1 and 2 and come away with historical Adam and Eve and not Imago Dei, you've missed the story already.
Yeah, yeah. You've already missed the
And
point.
and that is the reality of what he's highlighting here is that both sides, whether it's the hard-handed academics or the soft faith, whatever you want to call it, when both of those fields are fighting about historical Adam and Eve, it is done in a way that Imago Dei is shoved further and further down because it's no longer about the fact that both sides are image bearers making these arguments and just
Right.
about the fact that both sides are saying that the other one doesn't have any faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why we said at the beginning that when apologetics is done wrong, people actually get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's a thing, there's something to, and this is for our Western listeners. The thing that you need to consider when listening to us, and it kind of came up in the background earlier in today's stream, that you are listening to two men who are very well versed. I'll leave it there. Very well versed in multi ethnic ministry, which means we are in a context where we have a fundamental boots on the ground understanding that you can say the same thing to one group of people and it means something radically and wildly different to another group of people.
Just
And
this week, just this week, we had somebody that was using Genesis 1 and 2,
Mhm,
historical Adam and Eve,
mhm,
to justify both slavery, segregation, misogyny, and even sexual abuse, all as biblical things.
yeah, yeah,
And they claimed that to deny it was to deny the scriptures and that what they were doing was biblical apologetics.
yep,
This is why we have a very complicated view on the subject. Because we
yeah,
do know what, when it's done well, it can actually produce.
mhm,
But we also see regularly what the effects of it being done wrong produce as well.
yeah, yeah. And like any other aspect of this conversation, both groups would call themselves the thing. They
Mm-hmm.
would both use the title. And that's so in keeping the most important points, it provides the the runway for you to be able to reason and interrogate and evaluate while also keeping Christ centric in your thoughts, in your positions, all of that kind of stuff. Because Christocentrically speaking, a proof that lands you in a result that says hurting people is okay for
Mm-hmm.
such and such a reason, damaging people is okay for such and such a reason, or doing something that is clearly damaging is not damaging because the scriptures say this, means
And
that you have an invalid equation.
that is the key. And this is part of why I said on there, because anybody that has dealt with me knows I have a problem with people that try to gatekeep who is a Christian and who is not.
Yeah, yeah,
But I will always venture to say that if you see, if we'll just use the example we just said. If you read Genesis 1 and 2 and claim that and only see a biblical or a historical Adam and Eve and don't see Imago Dei, we may have some issues there that need corrected, but we don't have a problem.
right,
We can still say you're brothers and sisters. But if you read Genesis 1 and 2 and only see historical Adam and Eve and see that as a way to deny the Imago Dei and claim that that is the story of Scripture, I'm going to tell you straight up, you do not have a biblical Jesus, and I will actually question whether your faith is real or not.
right,
I will go as far to say that if you read the scriptures to a point where you are going to deny the very aspect of what God created us to be,
yeah,
that is where we are going to draw the line.
yeah,
And that's not because of apologetics. That's because of the fact that we are seeing the fruit that you are laying down.
yeah, 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 yeah. And that's the big picture, right? Like you look at any of these aspects, any of these things, right? Like we could sit here and I feel like for some people there may be some um anticlimactic aspect to this that we didn't get on here and
I mean,
strut
what do
the
they
fact
expect
that
with
we are
us? Like,
right. that we didn't get on here and we didn't, like, go to great details about all of the things that we know and all of that kind of stuff, but that we are focused on how does this fit into the bigger picture? How does this fit into everything else that we know to be true, or that we know that Jesus taught, and all of those kinds of things? Because unfortunately, I think whenever you're in the realm of taking specifically apologetics, and I use that term very loosely, to sharpen your sword, you use it as a whetstone, and you're just sitting there. You've got your sword there, and you're just sharpening it, ready to slay the next heretic that comes your way, and all of that. And you think that you're doing God's righteous work. Well, you can use anything. I've watched people use anti-Christian rhetoric in the exact same way. Like, you can use any of those things to damage people or to go after
Right.
people or things like that. That's exactly why we're stating, like, to understand at the deep level that just the realities of, like, Paul's situation, where he is presenting the unknown God, and
Mm-hmm.
he's saying, "Oh, so you have this thing over here, right? This is to the unknown God," and he immediately begins speaking to them in terms that they understand, in a context that they understand, and hits them where it resonates with them. That's contextualized, that's measured, that's purposeful. Awesome. All of those things are wonderful and so deep and so resonant that we can hit those things and all of that kind of stuff. But I will argue to you that when I have my show where I'm off playing music in the metal scene and using that as a ministry tool, and loving on that community, and being able to have a voice there, that it is using the context of the situation to be
Mm-hmm.
able to still push forward the kingdom of God.
Let me do the thing that both of us hate when it's done, but in this case, it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you said was the idea of if you are using apologetics to sharpen your sword, which is a very distinct image.
Yeah.
What is it that scripture actually identifies as what the church is supposed to do with swords? In both testaments, and it's a prophecy specifically. I don't have my buzzer, so don't worry, I won't buzz you if you got it wrong.
Ha!
The call is to do what? Ideally, what is going to happen to swords? They will be what?
Laid down.
Not just laid down. The prophecies that they will be remade into plows,
No.
right? Like the swords become, instead of weapons of war, they become weapons of feeding the people.
Right.
That is what apologetics actually should be looking like. The sword
Right.
of the spirit is a sword that should also be made into a plow.
Right.
Like the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, all that kind of stuff. There's a reason why we have farming words for all these things. Again, it's contextualized to farming communities. But at the same time, the message is the exact same thing of we are supposed to take the thing that can be used as a weapon, instead use it to feed the people that God has called us to feed.
Yep. Yep.
That is what a actual Christocentric theology should look like, is taking something that I know can cut you all the way down to your actual soul.
Yep.
But instead, I'm going to take it and use it as a way to feed you
Right.
and meet your needs.
Yep.
Because it's not about me, it's about the fact that God is the one that will provide for you if you allow him to do it.
Yep. Yeah. And so as we continue to unpack the Old Testament here on Kingdom on the Road, and we continue to demystify these different things, you are going to hear us continue to bring up in a secondary nature different aspects of the apologetics that are involved. Um, and that is because of everything that we've laid out here, that there are almost always more important things to be talked about, but it is still worth worth a conversation to highlight these things.
If you are a part of the Misfits Patreon Bible studies, so like the one we're getting ready to start here, we're walking through Daniel. The first week is heavy with history, both biblical and world history.
Yeah.
It has to be, because if we don't have it, you can't understand the book of Daniel.
Right.
Like
Same thing with
apologetics, right? Same thing. It was the same thing with Matthew. It was the same thing with Acts. It was the same thing with Esther.
yeah.
All of these books required us to actually understand what was going on, because once we understand what is going on, then suddenly all these things get twisted, like the idea that for such a time as this is a political rallying point, become mute as soon as you understand the context that we are dealing with.
Yep. Yep. That's about the size of it. So, guys, thank you all for joining us for this special edition of Kingdom on the Road. There are a lot of you from different spots than I normally see tuning in. So, hopefully, you will join us next week when we are back to form, working our way through Exodus in the entirety of the Old Testament. But right now, like I said, we're about halfway through Exodus, and so. But this is something that we have been alluding to for some time.
We've been joking about doing it, then serious about doing it, then delayed on doing it, and then a bunch of people asking us when we're going to do it, and then, like, it's just the way it is when the two of us are together.
Yep. So, guys, until next time, remember two very important things: that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. If you want to hear more from us in particular, we did just put out semi-recently our last episode of Is It Pagan, which is a holiday kind of centric show. It comes out a couple times a year.
We actually do qualify that show as apologetics, but again, that's tongue-in-cheek also. So, you know.
Yeah. So we just did one on Lent, and if Lent in celebrating the liturgical calendar is a pagan practice. So you can find that on the YouTubes as well. But guys, remember, you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. All right. Peace, y'all.